Now what if I want to define a function, and this function can find the volume of a cube by giving it all the dimensions of this cube. So how to do this? You should open a function here. Alright, so this is the first step ever. You should go to new and open a function. Whenever you open a function, Matlab will help you by giving you the first line. So this is function. You should never, guys, modify this word here. You should define your output arguments. And then you should define the name of the function. So as you can see, the name here is untitled4, and the name of the file is untitled4. And then you should define your input arguments. If you don't save this function, you will see always this star here on the file name. Whenever you save it, you will this star will vanish. All right. So guys, let's start by defining the output arguments, which will be vol, let's say, or volume, whatever you want. Okay. So I'm gonna define this output argument as vol, and then I'm gonna define the name of this function as volume. But before doing this, I'm gonna search if this volume exists. I think it exists in my workspace. So exist volume. No, I don't have this volume, so I can use it. I guess I'm gonna say that this function has the name of volume. And now what are my input arguments? Basically, guys, they are the height. Okay, so let's see the order here: height, width, length. All right. So the height, width, and length. So these are the three inputs that this function has to use in order to find the volume. Now you can, of course, remove all this because this is basically a detailed explanation. So you can write the objective of this function here with a percentage sign. And then, guys, you can say that this vol, which is my output, is equal to what? It is equal to the height times the width times the length. You should put a semicolon because whenever you call this function in your script, if you don't put a semicolon here, this vol will be printed out in your command window. So you should always put a semicolon if nothing should be printed in your command window, alright? Now, before calling this function in your script, what I want to do is to save this function, because if you don't save this function, you cannot use it, alright? So I'm gonna say save. Okay, so by default, as you can see, Matlab will give you the name of your function that you have, the name of the function that you have built. So if you modify this name, you will have, of course, an error. So guys, for the function, you keep the name and you click on save. The function, guys, could not be run. So you cannot run a function. You can call a function. Remember this note. You cannot run a function, but you can call a function. So how to call this function? You should go to any script. You can use it in any script. It is now available in your current folder, so you can use it in any script. So if you go back to the script here, remove this line, and say that vol1 is volume h1. So whenever, guys, you use the volume and you open your parentheses, Matlab will help you by the order of your inputs, because the order is very important. In fact, you don't have to keep the same name of the inputs. So as you can see here in the volume, you have height. Now here I'm using h1. You don't have to use the same name, but you have to conserve the order. Which means, guys, the first input will of course be height. It is the first input inside the volume. The second input will be width, which is here W1, and the third input will be L1. And this is also applicable for the output. You don't have to call your output the same name as your function, because in fact, I can here have different outputs using the call of this function several times. So this is volume 1, now this is volume 2. So I'm gonna copy paste this all over the lines And what I'm going to do here is to modify only the outputs. And that's it. So guys, here, if I run the script, so I have an error, let's see it. Okay, so I have an error in the function basically. So here, yes, I'm using a different variable, different input, so I should adjust it. So guys, they said you have an error inside your function at line 2. You are using a different height, a different variable. So guys, if you have to change anything in your function, don't forget to save it before calling it back inside your script. So I'm going to say save, and then go here and run it. So guys, this is the answers of the volumes. Now, if I have like 10 cubes, I can call this function 10 times, as long as I'm conserving the number of inputs and the order. Basically, guys, if I remove this L4 from here, and then I run my script, you will have an error. Because in fact, Matlab will alert you that there is not enough input arguments inside this line. You should have 3 inputs for this specified function. So you should adjust for this before running Matlab. So basically, guys, what matters for the function is the number of inputs, the number of outputs, because in fact I cannot have more than one output here, because in the function I only have one output, and the order of these inputs. So let's try, for example, what happens if I define another output here, and then I run the script. So basically Matlab will give me an error telling me that I have too many output arguments, because in fact the function has only one output argument. So I should remove this, keep one output argument, and then run it again. What if I add another output here, L5 let's say, or L3, and then I run it? Matlab will give me an error because I have too many input arguments inside whenever I call this function. So I should remove this and run it again. So these are the basic errors. Now what if this function has really 2 outputs? So if this function has really 2 outputs, let's say the first one is vol and the second one is the bottom area. So the bottom area of the cube, which is here with the width times the length. So I should here, let's say, define this area as the width times the length. And then, guys, I have to save, of course, this function, go back to the script and run it. What will happen? In fact, I will not have any error. Even if I have only one output, and this is only applicable for outputs, because in fact I should have the same number of inputs. But for the outputs, if you only define the one variable as your output, like in this case, then this means, guys, that you need the first output. Okay, so if this function has many outputs and you are only defining one output in your script, this Matlab will give you only the first output. Now here, for example, if I need to define the second output as A4, and remember, you don't have to have the same name as your output inside the function. So here the output is area and here the output is A4, as long as you are conserving the order. So now this A4, and don't forget, guys, if you need to define more than one output, you should put brackets. Alright? And then this A4 here will be the area of the bottom face of the rectangle. Whenever you run it, you will have this A4 in your workspace. Now what if, guys, I flip them? So I put first A4 and then the whole 4. In fact, guys, the area here is 3 and the volume is 15. So if I flip them and then run the code, Matlab will understand always that the first output is the volume, because you should conserve the order. Since the first output here inside this function is the volume and the second output is area, MATLAB is not concerned with the name you give to your outputs. So it's not his problem if you are naming the volume as area and the area as volume. MATLAB is only concerned with the order of your outputs. Since the first output should be the volume and the second output should be the area, even if you call the first output area, this will be the volume. Okay, because MATLAB is only concerned with the order of these outputs. The same goes to the inputs. So even here, guys, if you flip W4 with each 4, the first output will always be the height, because this is how you define them inside this volume. The first input is always the height, the second is the width, and the third is the length. So even here, guys, if you flip the name, it is not the problem of MATLAB. MATLAB will understand that the first one is the height, the second one is the width, and the third one is the length, and the same goes to the outputs. The first one is always the volume, and the second one is always the area. And that's why, guys, you will see that vol4 here has the value of the area because it is the second output. Now, if you want to only see the second output, you don't want to see the first output, let's say. So what matters for you is the area only. So you don't want to define volume, you don't want to see this volume, you only want to see this area. What you should do, you cannot define only one output, because if you do this, MATLAB will give you the first output. You need the second output. You should, guys, type shift and then the icon close to 1, alright? The first one, okay? So the icon close to 1 will give you the symbol, alright? And then you put a comma, and then you can define your output variable, like let's say area with a small a, it doesn't matter. And then you click on run, and then you will have this area as the second output of your function. Now, the last part of this video is to see how a function has its own workspace. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go to this volume here. And before defining this volume, I'm going to define, let's say, P as product. And this P will be equal to height times width. And then here, guys, instead of height times width, I'm going to use this P, so that vol will be equal to P, which is height times width times length. I'm going to save my variable here, my function, go back to my script, and run the script to see if there will be a P variable in my workspace. So if I run it here, guys, you can see that there is no P. And if you write P here in your command window, MATLAB will tell you that there is no function or variable called P. Although you have used this P in this function and you have called this function in your script. In fact, guys, if you define, let's say, 1,000 variables in your function, MATLAB will not show you all these variables in your script. MATLAB will only show you the output variable that you need. And this is why functions save memory. So here, guys, you can see that this P defined in your function is not available in your workspace and you cannot use it. Even here, guys, if you define a P, let's say it is 10, this P here, if you run it, this P will not change this P in your function, and you will have the same output. This P here is different than the P used in the function, and this is because any user-defined and built-in function has its own workspace that is different from your workspace, from the user workspace, and this will save you memory. Thank you.